Rain fell sideways over Auger Flats, Nebraska, and 12-year-old Jasper Coyle stood in it, barefoot, guiding a gutter pipe into barrel number 61. Water hammered the tin roof of the tool shed. Thunder cracked somewhere past the grain elevator. Jasper didn't flinch. He tightened a hose clamp with cold fingers, counted the barrels lined along the fence, rust-streaked, mismatched, some still smelling of diesel, and moved to the next one. Behind him, his mother watched from the porch, arms crossed, saying nothing. The dog wouldn't even go out in it. But Jasper stayed until the barrel filled to the brim, until his lips went blue, until the storm broke into a drizzle and quit. Then he capped the lid and wrote a number on it in white paint pen. 61. 20 more waited empty in the barn. Nobody in that town could tell you what that boy was doing out there. Storm after storm, barrel after barrel, and stranger still, nobody could tell you why he wouldn't stop. Before we get to why, I'd love it if you hit that subscribe button. It costs nothing, and it means everything to a small channel like this one. Drop a comment and let me know what town you're watching from tonight. Now, back to Auger Flats, and to a boy nobody understood yet. Auger Flats sat in the dry crook of Kestrel County, a town of one blinking stoplight, a feed store, and a Baptist church with a roof older than most of its congregation. The land out there had always been thirsty. Wells ran deep and stingy, and every few summers the county trucked water in tankers to families whose pumps gave out. The Coyles knew that trouncing well. Jasper's father had died 2 winters back, thrown from a tractor on a slope nobody'd bothered to terrace, and since then it had been Jasper, his mother Adeline, and his little sister Junebug holding together 60 acres that mostly grew Johnson grass and worry. Adeline Coyle worked the register at the feed store 6 days a week and came home smelling of alfalfa and diesel. Money didn't stretch. It barely bent. Each Sunday she counted bills at the kitchen table by lamplight, lips moving, sorting stacks into envelopes marked in pencil, water, propane, June's shoes. Junebug, only 7, had taken to sleeping with a jelly jar of well water on her nightstand, convinced that if she watched it close enough, it wouldn't disappear. That was the house Jasper grew up in that spring, careful, quiet, counting. The barrels had come from Odell Marsh's junkyard on the county road, hauled home 2 and 3 at a time in the bed of a truck that barely ran. Odell himself thought the boy had gone soft in the head. "Boy," he said, wiping grease on his coveralls, "you know rain don't pay bills, only money pays bills." Jasper just nodded, loaded another barrel, and drove off without an argument. Around town, the barrels became a joke. Kids at school called him Rain Man Coyle. The barber said it loud enough for the whole shop to hear that the Coyle boy had lost his sense along with his daddy. Even the pastor, a well-meaning man named Elton Fussell, stopped Adeline after service one Sunday. "That's a strange practice for a boy his age," he said gently, "the way a man says something he half means as concern and half means as warning." Adeline only smiled thin and said her son had his reasons. Privately, though, she wondered the same thing everyone else did. She'd asked Jasper once, straight out, why 80 barrels, why now, why Rainwater when the spigot in the yard still ran for now. He'd only said, "It won't always run, Mama." Then he went back outside to check the seals. What nobody in Auger Flats knew, not Odell, not Pastor Fussell, not even Adeline fully, was that Jasper had a plan laid out in a spiral notebook under his mattress, in handwriting still round with childhood, pages of numbers, gallons per barrel. Gallons per week the family used. A rough sketch of the property with hand-drawn lines running from the barrels to a buried cistern he'd started digging himself, one shovelful at a time, behind the old smokehouse. He wasn't hoarding water for the fun of it. He was building a reserve, quietly, methodically, against a day he was certain was coming. That certainty had a name, the Kestrel County Water Notice, tacked to the feed store's bulletin board back in March. The county's shared aquifer levels had dropped low enough that the board had begun rationing tanker deliveries, prioritizing farms with active contracts. Families without a current water hauling agreement, like the Coyles, who'd let theirs lapse after Jasper's father passed, would be bumped to the back of the line. Worse, the county treasurer had quietly begun flagging delinquent water access accounts for its fall tax auction. Adeline was 3 months behind. If she didn't catch the account current or prove an alternative supply by the first frost, the Coyle land would go up on the courthouse steps to the highest bidder. Jasper had overheard that part by accident, crouched on the porch steps while his mother spoke low into the phone with the county clerk, voice cracking in a way he'd never heard from her. He didn't tell her he'd heard. He just went back to the barn that night and painted another number on another barrel. 62. He wasn't a boy who cried easy, but he sat a long while in the dark barn that night, hand pressed flat against the cold metal, like it might answer back. Through April and May, Jasper built his system in pieces, the way a boy builds anything: trial, failure, stubborn correction. He rigged gutters from the barn roof using scrap flashing bent by hand. He learned the hard way that a barrel set unlevel would crack its seams under the weight of full water. He lost 9 gallons and a Saturday afternoon learning that lesson. He scavenged bicycle inner tubes to line the gutter seams so they wouldn't leak. He asked the school librarian, Miss Vernell Atkins, for anything she had on rain catchment, and she found him 2 old agriculture pamphlets from the 70s, yellow and brittle, which he read by flashlight until he had them memorized. Odell Marsh watched all this with the patient scorn of a man who'd seen every fool idea Kestrel County ever produced. "You're wasting good barrels on bad rain," he told Jasper one afternoon, spitting into the dust. "That water'll go green as a frog's back before you ever need it." Jasper wiped his hands on his jeans. "Then I'll filter it," he said, and showed Odell a homemade charcoal and sand filter he'd built from a coffee can and a mason jar. Odell laughed, not unkindly, more surprised than cruel, and said the boy might just be too stubborn to fail. He didn't offer to help. Not yet. By June, Jasper had 40-some barrels filled and sealed, arranged along the fence line like sentries, each one numbered, each one logged in his notebook alongside the date it was filled and roughly how many gallons it held. He'd started digging the cistern in earnest now, too. An 8x8 pit lined with scavenged concrete blocks, working after chores and before dark, blistered hands wrapped in his father's old gloves. Junebug would sit at the pit's edge, swinging her legs, handing him blocks one at a time, asking questions he didn't always have answers to. "What's it for, Jasper?" "For when the town runs dry," he told her. She believed him the way little sisters believe things, completely, without needing proof. Then came the setback. A dry spell hit in July, the kind Kestrel County had seen only twice in living memory, 6 straight weeks without a drop of rain, the sky bleached white and merciless, the creek beds cracking into gray puzzle pieces. Jasper's gutters caught nothing but dust. The barrels stopped filling. Worse, one scorching afternoon, a rot he hadn't caught in time split 2 of his oldest barrels clean through, and he lost nearly 150 gallons into the dirt in a single afternoon, watching it vanish like it had never existed. He sat down hard in the mud that wasn't mud anymore, just soaked dust, and for the first time, he let himself believe Odell might be right. That same week, the county clerk's letter arrived, the one Adeline had been dreading. The Coyle account was now 4 months delinquent. Without a current hauling contract or documented alternative water source verified by county inspection, the property would be listed for the September auction, 6 weeks out. Adeline read the letter twice at the kitchen table, then folded it small and didn't cry, not in front of the children, but Jasper heard her that night through the wall, and it was a worse sound than any storm. He almost quit that week. He told Miss Atkins so, returning her pamphlets, saying maybe it had all been a fool's errand like everyone said. She didn't argue with him. She just handed him a third pamphlet he hadn't seen, this one on drought cycle patterns in the plains, and said, "Storms don't care whether you believe in them. They come regardless. Questions only whether you're ready." Jasper carried that pamphlet home, sat on his porch step in the dead, rainless heat, and reread his notebook from page 1. Then he got up, patched the split barrels with tar and scrap tin, and started again. He worked through the worst of that heat like a man twice his age, finishing the cistern, lining it, sealing it with a coating of pond liner. Odell quietly, without announcement, dropped off one evening and left leaning against the barn door. No note, no conversation, just the material a boy needed and couldn't afford. Jasper understood it for what it was and never mentioned it to Odell again, which was, in its own way, exactly what Odell wanted. The rains finally broke in mid-August, and Jasper caught them like a man catching money falling from the sky. Every gutter, every barrel, every square foot of roof he could rig a downspout to. By the last week of August, he had 78 barrels full and the cistern topped near capacity, better than 1,000 gallons banked in the ground behind the smokehouse. He had 6 days left before the auction notice took effect. He did not know yet that the barrels would matter for a reason no spreadsheet in his notebook had accounted for. The heat that had cracked the creek beds hadn't just dried up water. It had dried up the whole county, turning the wheat stubble and dead Johnson grass into standing tinder. On the last Tuesday of August, at 4 in the afternoon, a downed power line off County Road 9 threw a spark into a fence row, and within 20 minutes a wildfire was running low and fast across the dry pasture toward Auger Flats, driven by a wind nobody had forecast. The town's single water tower, already strained by the drought, had been drawn down to protect the treatment plant. When the volunteer fire truck rolled out toward the Coyle place, because the fire was cutting straight toward that end of the county road, its tank ran dry after 11 minutes of spraying the leading edge. The pump gasped. The hose went slack. Men stood in the smoke, looking at each other, out of water, with flames still 40 yards from 3 homes and a barn full of hay. That was the first sighting. Odell Marsh, running his truck past the smoke toward the Coyle fence line, shouting the words that would be repeated in that county for years after Coyle's got water. Coyle's got barrels full of water. Firefighters turned. Neighbors turned. And there along the fence stood 80 rusted barrels, numbered in white paint, catching the orange firelight, every single one of them full. What happened next took 11 minutes and felt like 11 hours. Men and boys formed a line straight from Jasper's fence to the fire truck's tank, passing barrels hand to hand, dumping them into the intake, running back for more. Jasper worked the middle of that line himself, soot on his face, uncapping barrels he'd sealed months before in the rain, watching water he'd caught drop by drop go straight into a hose aimed at the fire crawling toward his own barn. The cistern behind the smokehouse got tapped too, a hand pump rigged in under 2 minutes by a fireman who didn't ask permission, just gratitude. The second beat came at dusk, once the fire was beaten back to a smoking black scar in the pasture, 40 yards short of the nearest house. Half the town had gathered along the fence by then, drawn by truck headlights and shouting and the strange sight of barrels, the Rain Man's barrels standing half empty and steaming in the cooling air. Odell Marsh stood with his cap off, staring at barrel number 61 like it was a stranger he suddenly recognized. Pastor Fussell stood beside him, silent, his earlier words about strange practices sitting heavy and unspoken. Nobody said much of anything at all. They didn't need to. The scorched line in the field stopped almost exactly where the water had. Word of what happened at the Coyle place traveled the ordinary way news travels in a small county, through the feed store counter, the church steps, the barber's chair, but this time it carried no mockery in it at all. The county fire marshal came out the next morning to write his report and stayed an extra hour just looking at the setup, the gutters, the filter, the cistern, asking Jasper question after question the way you'd ask an engineer twice his age. Within the week, that fire marshal's report reached the county treasurer's office, noting the Coyle property maintained a documented, functioning alternative water source, more than sufficient, in fact, to have aided emergency county fire suppression. The delinquency flag was quietly lifted pending a payment plan Adeline could actually manage. No speeches were made about it. The paperwork simply changed, the way paperwork does when the truth of a thing becomes impossible to ignore. Odell Marsh showed up 2 days later with a truckload of fresh barrels, no charge, and didn't say much beyond. Figured you could use more. Jasper thanked him and got straight to rigging new gutters, same as always, like nothing all that remarkable had happened. Junebug still sits at the cistern's edge some evenings, though these days folks stop by just to look at it. Auger Flats doesn't call him Rain Man anymore, not the way they used to mean it. Adeline says the land held on because her boy believed a dry year always ends, one way or another, in rain. And in Kestrel County, they still tell it plain and simple. The fire stopped where the water started, and the water started with a boy nobody believed.